Right now in our current economic environment, whether we're headed to a recession, we're in some sort of a recession, what I am hearing across the board in industries right now is it is hard. It is hard to get attention. It is hard to free up capital, and it's hard to get people to change. So today I thought it'd be really good to talk about a couple of the tactics that we find when salespeople build habits and behaviors around. They are in a better position to compete on value, not price. And just yesterday, I was talking to a sales leader who said, "Hey, Julie, we have a problem. And here's the problem. We're discounting on average 40% for every deal we win. And we don't think we should be doing that." And I don't know if you're seeing some of the same thing. The pressure to cut price is huge right now. Yet the pressure to maintain margins that we're facing internally is just as huge. So we're going to focus on just a couple of tactics. And I just kind of want to set the stage. One of my colleagues mentioned this to me the other day, and I believe it's true. And in sales, we have a tendency to make things harder than they are. We have a tendency to think it has to be complicated for it to be successful. And the reality is, simplicity is where the elegance is found. And our job as sales professionals is to uncomplicate it for the buyers. And it's not that selling is complicated right now. I honestly don't think it is. What I think is that buying is complicated. A lot of people have an opinion. A lot of people get a vote. It is very difficult to build consensus. It is very difficult to gain agreement and collaboration on those buying teams. And that manifests itself in complexity for the salesperson, but we need to keep it simple in terms of our execution, because a confused buyer will never buy. So we're going to try to keep it very simple today. Now, simple doesn't mean it's easy. We still need to get very skilled and disciplined at execution, but it means we have to remove the complexity on our side of things. So I don't think anybody's going to argue that there is a challenge today in the marketplace. We are competing for capital. Buyers are more educated. They think they know all the answers. Some of them know a lot of the answers, but they really want to understand how they're going to build the case to buy the things they need to buy. And our job as sales professionals is not to just be the demo dollies showing up, leading with product conversations. It's to focus the conversation in our selling environments on customer outcomes. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, because every customer has to make some sort of a decision. We want to facilitate that decision, and how we sell today is just as important as what we sell. So what we know for sure is everything changed 3 years ago. It is no longer business as usual. As a matter of fact, exactly 3 years ago, I did a webinar, and my key takeaway from that webinar was, okay, whether you agree with the shutdown or you don't agree with the shutdown, everything changed in business, and nothing in your pipeline is qualified if it was qualified in February of March of 2020, because the business issues and imperatives facing every company in every industry, in every geography, changed overnight. And sales reps were frustrated that things weren't happening, and the reality was they were in a requalification mode. We're going to talk a little bit about qualification today, because it is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process. And in these turbulent times, in times of change and uncertainty, something that was qualified yesterday, things change, and all of a sudden, your whole opportunity is in limbo all over again. And we're going to talk about some tactics on that. So let's set the stage. What is value? And I hear a lot of people say, hey, I've been doing value selling for years. I know exactly what my value proposition is. I am very clear and I can communicate value. I know the outcomes that our customers want, and I know the ROI that I can promise them. And they think that is what constitutes value selling. We take a very different point of view here at Value Selling. We don't think selling is telling. We think selling is a collaboration process between you and the prospect. It's not you telling them what KPIs they should be measuring. It's you understanding what KPIs they want to measure. It's you expanding that KPI list and getting buy-in that there might be additional unexpected bonus value, if you will, that if we start to think about it with a little more clarity, we might be able to expand that value proposition and how they customize this. So according to just any old dictionary that you might be looking at, here is what value is. It's what something is worth. And the interesting thing about that is it's what both the buyer and seller think it's worth. It's what it's deserving of. I can go car shopping and say, wow, that is a beautiful Maserati. And at the same time, make the decision based on my judgments, my needs, my desires, that, yeah, while it's a beautiful driving engine, it is not for me. It is not worth it to me. So this whole value conversation ends up being a little bit customer specific because different people will value different things. Different organizations will value different things. It is also the estimated monetary worth of something. That's kind of the value that we're going to talk about today. When you think of value selling, our job as sales professionals is to uncover the $1 million headache that our prospects and customers have and solve it with a $100,000 aspirin. What I think is often happening today is we talk a lot about the headache. Oh boy, that headache's big. Oh boy, that headache must be keeping you up at night. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. And then we come in and say, but guess what? I've got a great $100,000 aspirin. There's no context. And so what does the prospect say? $100,000, that's a lot of money. Maybe I can get you 75. Maybe I can get you 55. Whatever that is, there's no context. The buyer knows more about your price than you know about how they estimate the work of eliminating the problems and impacting their business. That puts us at a disadvantage. And so what we're going to talk about today is some tips and tools that you can use today that if you were to go call your prospect and say, hey, is it worth changing to implement my products and services? Is it worth it? And when I know how a prospect will answer that question and quantify that answer and build that case that's believable and that they own as possible, I'm going to be better at then positioning my investment summary in the context of the return they expect to get. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next few minutes. Value selling is an organization with a sales methodology that includes training, software tools, execution, support, consulting, and coaching that we work with business-to-business organizations all over the globe to become the catalyst for them to sell the full value of their solutions to their customers. Our customers include software companies, they include consumer goods companies, they include manufacturing companies, business services, telecommunications. The industries are vast and wide. The challenge for the sales professional is helping the customer build the case and differentiate their solution in a sea of sameness to uncover incremental value. as Julie said, my name's Julie Thomas, and I lead the value selling team, and I'm pleased to share with you some of the golden jewels of our crown, if you will, the value selling framework that you can use in your go-forward sales strategy. So before we dive into those tips, let me just share with you a little bit about why customers work with us. We sell results. Yes, we do training. Yes, we have software. Yes, we can speak and do consulting and all of the stuff you would expect from a firm like ours. But that's not why companies do business with us. They do business with us because they're confident that they can move the needle on their sales productivity and results to achieve the revenue goals that those sales leaders and sales enablement professionals are tasked with achieving. And here's just a couple of examples for recent customers that they told us was the impact from value selling. And then a little more specifically, we were working with a company called Perceptix. They sell services and software, a platform to the human resource professionals in large organizations to understand culture, understand employee perceptions of everything that's going on in their employee base. And Perceptix in 2023 moved forward with value selling, and they have had unbelievable gains in the results for their products and services in the marketplace. I'm not going to read these to you, but they have told us that value selling as a partner has enabled them to achieve results they never thought were possible in a multitude of metrics. Now, the first metric that they were trying to get us to help them with was to upsell into bigger deals. The other metrics that we were looking at beyond that average contract value ended up being kind of the icing on the cake that sales leadership team and sales enablement team is just blown away by the impact that they were able to achieve in partnering with us. So let's talk about those 3 tactics that I told you I was going to talk about. I promised the commercial's over for now. We're going to talk about the value conversation. How does that happen? When does it happen? What does it look like? We're going to talk a little bit about if I want to compete on value, I also have to be perceived as different or unique. Because if I'm perceived as a commodity in a sea of sameness of the alternatives facing my potential buyers, they expect me to win on price. So I want to get proactive. I want to get deliberate in that differentiating, and that's a key. And then we want to talk about what is one of the things that we see happening again and again, and maybe this has even happened to you, is that you negotiate, and then you find out that you're negotiating with someone who doesn't have the power to buy. So we're going to talk about the key to maintaining and identifying not only the power in the decision, but the power in the execution of the buying decision. So we are negotiating with the right people. And I'm not saying that if you do value selling, you will never have to discount. You will never have to come up with special concessions in a client-specific scenario. That would be a ridiculous promise for me to make. But I am saying, if you do the things that I'm talking about, you will put yourself in a much stronger position when those conversations evolve in your sales cycle. And at the end of the day, this is what the value selling framework includes as a few of the components that we work with our clients on. So, as I said, if we don't talk about value, the only thing we're talking about is price. And value has to be quantified. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's good when we know that we're going to have directional value. And by directional value, I mean, it's great if I can say to you, hey, Jay, if you partner with my firm, I can save you time and your time is worth X. And that might free you up to do the things that you want to do, which might be have nothing to do with work. Or it might free you up to do the things that you want to do, that light your fire, that get you excited in your work, because you're eliminating some wasted time on these other tasks. But it is up to you to decide, is it worth it? It's not up for me to tell you what that is. And that's really the difference of value selling versus communicating a value proposition. The value proposition is important. Don't get me wrong. Marketing, you have marketing teams in your organizations. We may even have marketers on the line today that spend a lot of time defining what is our promise to the marketplace, that if you partner with us, or you invest in us, or you choose to do business with us, you will realize. It's a high level macro promise. Again, we'll save you time. We'll save you money. We will enable you to do things that maybe you didn't think were possible. Client specific value is taking that value proposition and quantifying it. So if I go back to the example with my friend Jay on the phone, Jay, how much time? What's your time worth? What would you do with that time? And can I have a deliberate conversation to quantify the impact of that time savings? And my job as a value seller is to keep building up that value proposition with different metrics. And we want that to be an absolute value, because we're going to give them an absolute investment summary. I want to be able to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges. And that becomes the key to value selling. My experience is many sales reps gloss over this conversation, or assume that if the customer is interested in pursuing and spending time with you, that there's enough value to motivate them to act. Let me tell you what value is not. Value is not their budget. Value is not what your competitor is proposing. Value is the specific outcomes that can be measured and quantified that your prospect will get from doing business with you. Now, often value can have two different ways to quantify this. And we talk about this again and again with our clients. One way to quantify value is ROI. And that is the return on investment. I'm going to spend $100 on this software tool, and I'm going to gain $300 back in time, efficiency, or productivity, and therefore it's worth my time. That's one way. In value selling, we help customers expand the ROI from what they might think is only one or two KPIs to a multitude of KPIs. As a matter of fact, in our workshops, we do an exercise where we have a list of maybe 30, 40 KPIs, potential KPIs in a workbook. And we ask them to circle the ones that they can impact. And 100% of the time that I've done that exercise with the clients, they identify more metrics than they thought they would, that they could impact. Why is that important? With that awareness, I can now go expand the conversation with the prospects I'm having. So ROI, return on investment, one way to build a business case. The other way that we often build a business case is what I call COI, and that's cost of inaction. What happens if you do nothing? What happens if you stay with your existing supplier, vendor that is maybe not getting you the results that you want, and you can't stop the bleeding in your processes or your inefficiencies? So COI can be another way to build that case. And the value seller is armed with the questions and the conversational skills to understand, is it one or the other for this particular client? Or maybe it's a combination of the two that we need to identify. Hey, what's the cost of not doing anything and the return on doing something? And does that together combine to a business case that you can sell, get buy-in, socialize, and ultimately build the consensus to move forward? Our customers come to us because their sales reps don't know how to have those conversations, and they are failing to have them. And once the pricing is out there, they realize it's really hard to back that prospect up and say, oh, by the way, I know I've told you that my proposal is $500,000, but I forgot we never really talked about why you might want to do this and how you're going to measure the outcomes and the impact. It's really hard to do after the fact. It's a lot easier to do it before that number's out and the prospect becomes fixated on your investment. So what does that mean for us? Well, one of the ways that we want to uncover unique value that accrues to us vis-a-vis the competitive alternatives is to expand the customer's view of what they're trying to solve for. And the key to that is understanding not all problems are created equal. If you walk through the halls of my office, and I'm sure if I walk through the halls of yours, I could identify areas that could be improved upon. And you could certainly identify areas that could be improved upon in my business. The reality is, I am picking and choosing as the leader of my organization where I am focused and what business issues or business imperatives I am going to fund, resource, and pay attention to. Because I don't care how big the business is, they can't do everything at once. So the key to understanding how you're going to measure the impact of your solution is to first and foremost, make sure you're focused on solving problems that matter, problems that are worth solving, problems that do have direct measurable incomes on the business. And I'll tell you, as simple as that sounds, this is one of the biggest gaps that we see in every customer we work with, in every industry, in every geography. They are failing to connect the problems they solve to the business imperatives, business issues of their organizations, and therefore, it's hard to quantify the impact. It's hard to quantify the impact of solving a problem if it can't be measured on the business outcomes of that organization. And I'm using business loosely. School systems are businesses. They operate and have to justify decisions. Healthcare is a business. It might have different nuances to that. Not-for-profits are a business that doesn't have to pay taxes, but they still are trying to raise money, keep the money they raise, and put them into their programs. And the same is true with SLED or state and local government or federal government. They all have to make business decisions, but their business issues are just going to be slightly different. This is a big gap in value selling. Am I having a business conversation before I talk about the solution that I have to solve the problems you've identified? Can I expand your view of the problems that will allow you to think that more of my solution is important? And that is a part of the key to value selling. And then the reality is, in today's turbulent times, we have two sales every time. And you can't win one without the other. And you can't say, hey, I won in the solution, but I lost the fight for capital. Because today you absolutely have to win in the category. And then you also have to win in the fight for capital. And guess what? That fight for capital, specifically that boardroom with the long mahogany table or the facade of a mahogany table in a Zoom meeting that your customers are going through, you are 99.9% not invited to that meeting. So you need to make sure they're armed with the insight and the case and the justification to win the fight for capital for somebody who's saying, should I open a new office in Topeka to grow my revenues, or should I solve this sales productivity problem? Someone's making that decision, and it's based on the gains they expect to earn. So business value is rooted in the language of business. Business value and value selling is rooted in the business conversations that surround the technical product conversations you have. product-led sales will only get you so far. And once the easy business is gone, what are you going to do? You have to go in and re-engage at a business level to understand where they are putting resource and funding and how you can fit into that with your solution to add incremental value and convince them to change and take action and select you. So one of the third components of value that we're going to talk about today, and this is being played out again and again and again. As a matter of fact, there's an emerging body of research on neuromarketing, neuro decision making, neuro sales. And for as long as I've been with value selling, we have held to the principle people make emotional buying decisions for logical reasons. Let's face it, if data alone would help you make a better decision, there would not be one person overweight in America or eating the wrong foods. But Weight Watchers is alive and well. So data alone does not sway us. It is the intangible, the subconscious, where we make the actual decision to take action, and then we seek the data to support that decision. At Value Selling, we call that personal value. At the 2023 CSO Summit by Gartner, which I was lucky enough to be at in May of 2023, their keynote was 100% about personal value. They called it personalization, but that's different than marketing personalization. They called it the humanization and personalization of value. And it's that each of us are motivated for our own reasons. And you as salespeople, when you have deep trust-based relationships with your prospects and customers, they will open up to you and tell you what's important to them. They will open up to you and tell you what motivates them. And as a sales professional, you can use that to create energy, urgency, and help compel them to take that action. So we talked a little bit about differentiation. Again, this is from the Gartner conference that was just in May of 2023. But I think this was interesting in terms of what happens when a customer doesn't see differentiation in their prospects, or in their prospective suppliers, or as they're going through the alternatives of who they can buy. Because if they don't see that differentiation, they're more likely to work with a big brand. Kind of makes sense. If I don't know what, even in my personal purchases, if I don't know what the difference is between somebody I've never heard of and somebody that I know is a proven entity, that could sway me as well. When there's no differentiation, it delays our buying decisions. And as I said at the beginning, a confused buyer doesn't take action, ever. If I'm confused, and if a salesperson has confused you, that's even worse. It's why how we communicate is so important today, because there's a lot of information putting into that. But the reality is it just gives you some insight. If there's no differentiation, almost a third of the buyers that Gartner interviewed said they will ask for more concessions, whether it's pricing or terms. Interesting. Our ability to differentiate will help us accelerate sales cycle. It helps us be selected as the appropriate provider, and it will help us hold that price and margin hold very true. So the interesting thing about differentiation is it is not the same as just being different. And again, this is something that we see with all of our clients again and again. They'll come in and say, well, I can tell you why we're different. And that's good. That is a great starting point. Don't get me wrong. But being different is not differentiated. The Maserati was different, but I didn't need it. I didn't care about the subtleties of and the nuances of that Maserati. For me, what was important to me in the car that I ended up buying is, where's the cup holder? How does Apple CarPlay integrate? Is it a nice driving experience? Does my 6'4" husband fit in the front seat? And does my 6'2" son fit in the back seat? Or am I going to have to listen to a bunch of grown men complain every time they have to get in my car? Those were the things that were important to me that I wanted to understand in the differentiation. It had nothing to do with how big the engine was. That's just me. But the interesting thing of that whole process is, as a salesperson, you need to understand, hey, if you're selling to Julie, you're probably selling some different capabilities, and she probably cares about some things differently than if you're selling to Scott, or if you're selling to Corey. It could be very different. Differentiation is the customer specific things they care about. And if we lead with just telling them that we're different, and I've seen this again and again and again, I've seen sales reps inadvertently talk about what they think is their coolest, unique capability out of context for the buyer. The buyer doesn't give a hoot about that capability. And guess what? The buyer has now discounted your solution because you're overkill for what they need, or you're too expensive, or you've given them a reason not to select you, and you don't even know what happened. So differentiation is different than being different. And so a part of what we do in value selling is spend a really good amount of time to thinking that through. And how do you do that? How do you know what's important to the individuals? And in a team selling environment, with a team buying environment, what's important to each of those individuals sitting around the buying table could be very different. So we want to understand what's a framework for a conversation that I can have with anyone on that buying committee. And the reality is, often if you're undifferentiated in the buyer's mean, it doesn't necessarily mean your product's inferior. So sometimes the message is, hey, we got to go back. We don't do this. We don't do that. And the reality is, no, what we need to do is focus the conversation, reframe it to what we do, and not let the tail be wagging our dog and let the competition set that criteria for us. And we call that kind of the flip-flop approach. It's a simple conversational preparation exercise that we go through to get people to think through. If I want the prospect to acknowledge this difference, how do I get there in the conversation? What questions do I ask to uncover or help the prospect recognize things and expand their thought process? And we do that through an integrated questioning process. At the end of the day, that's what selling is. Challenging customers, telling customers what they should do or what they should know tends to lead to conflict. And we believe that questioning prospects, collaborating with prospects, building consensus with prospects leads to solutions that we can implement together. So, what can you learn from the lemonade versus the Long Island iced tea if you're over 18 or 21 or what have you? Is it's not about the price, it's what's under the price. And so we work with organizations that want to sell the Long Island iced tea, and they want to hold that price integrity high and therefore have to differentiate what is under the covers there. So the last tactic I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to be quiet and let Julie open it up for some questions for us, is this data has held true for a long time across a multitude of industries. I've heard this data from Forrester. I've heard it from Gartner. I've heard it from other people that do McKinsey. The reality is salespeople are really abysmal at forecasting. And there's a number of reasons that is true, but we're going to talk about a couple of them. And I think that one of the key reasons reps are terrible at forecasting is that qualification has been looked at as an event and not a continuous process. And the reason I know this is if I'm talking to a customer or sales leader, I will ask the question, how often does something reach 80% or 90% in your pipeline and then drop down because something changed and there's more work to be done? And I've never had a customer say, oh, our pipeline is fluid, things move forward and move backwards all the time. I always hear, no, they get to the 80% level and then they sit there and they either rot or die or nothing happens. And it's because qualification is continuous. So we need to understand that it's dynamic, and especially if you're selling bigger ticket items that tend to take a little bit more time, or your sales cycle evolves over time, the probability that your customer, their industry, what's going on in the world is static and not dynamic is slim to none. I know I, for one, have been ready to close the deal. Like, man, I am on my way. I am picking up the signed contract. And only to find out that that person decided to resign today. And while the purchase order was signed on someone's desktop, they weren't going to give it to me because they wanted to let the new person weigh in and own the decision. And you're just like ready to just die that I didn't get it the day before. But things happen and people can be fickle. They can be fickle for all kinds of reasons. They could read something, they could have ADD, they could forget what they told you. Anything can happen to change what's going on. So anything you come out of this webinar with an idea is, am I continually qualifying and reconfirming what our joint understanding is it true? Right now, as we come out of summer and a lot of sales cycles stalled over the summer, so maybe you haven't talked to somebody in 5 or 6 weeks. We can't come in and assume that they remembered exactly the way we do and that nothing has changed in their organization. We need to go back. We can start with what we agreed was true back in June or July, but we likely need to go back, reconfirm, and just re-engage and revalidate whether or not things are still the same. So what happens as we look at the deals that we work with our prospects, both in workshops and in our consulting engagements, there's really 5 big reasons that people don't end up buying. And these are really what ends up in the no decisions, which if we can all agree that if we eliminated our no decision sales cycles sooner rather than later, our productivity would go through the roof. I think that is a good place to start. Number 1, and I'm going to go counterintuitively right to left here, we find out that we were solving problems not worth solving. There was no business issue identified. There was no buy-in that those problems were solving by somebody who had the authority to release the funds or approve those purchases. But you were solving some problems that were acknowledged. They were a pain in the neck. They were a nuisance. They were ready to go, but we became a nice to have and not a need to have. The second big reason, and it has been true in sales for as long as I've been in sales, we haven't gotten to either the right person or all the right people. And in the 9th hour, we find out that somebody else has to get involved, or somebody has been neglected unintentionally, but neglected to do that. Number 3, too much risk. And in turbulent times, people are risk averse. And that's especially true if you're just trying to displace a current vendor. It is always better to stay with the devil you know than the devil you don't when things are crazy. So if there's too much risk and the customer thinks it'll be too much work to make the switch, you're probably in trouble. Lack of differentiation, we just talked about, and then lack of value. Lack of value. And when I talk to customers about what is the quantified value, it is always fascinating what we hear, but many of them don't know how to have that value conversation, which is why value selling framework is such a good fit for companies that are wrestling with any of these challenges.